Hey Goodies fan, it's Jeffers here with another Goodies podcast interview, re-edit, remaster, re-release, in which we take interviews that were previously only available on the podcast and we put them up on YouTube. This time around, it's an interview with Jacob Edwards, or as I like to call him, Toasty Vogon. This is a man who somehow, when he was faced with a blank page in the magazine he was editing, managed to get in touch with Graeme Garden, ask him to write a poem, and not only convince him to do so, but he had it back within 24 hours. Which is astonishing, so we're going to find out more about that, but also just chat to Jacob as a Goodies fan. And he certainly is. So let's hear more. We're going to go back to 2010, Goodies podcast number 28, an interview with Jacob Edwards. Now on the podcast, we're chatting to Jacob Edwards, who is the editor for issue 45 of Andromeda Spaceways Inflight Magazine, and he's in Brisbane. How you going, Jacob?
Very well, thanks, Jeff.
You have, in your issue of the magazine, a poem by Graeme Garden about time travel, but we'll get onto that in just a moment. I was hoping you could just give us a bit of brief background of the magazine.
Okay, the Andromeda Spaceways Inflight Magazine, billed as Australia's pulpiest. Okay, imagine you're a speculative fiction writer at the turn of the century, and by that, of course, I mean the year 2000, not H.G. Wells and ridiculously oversized moustaches. You're living in Australia, you're good at what you do, but really, there's just not that many markets for speculative fiction. You've got Orilis, which has been around for about 10 years, producing sporadically. Every now and again, another magazine crops up, does a few issues, folds. Other than that, you send things off to America. And as you may know, posting things to America, that costs you a lot of money. You're going to wait for several months before you receive a reply, and usually it'll be a stock rejection. America's got its own culture, its own spelling. There's a real need at the time for a durable magazine that's going to produce more than just a couple of issues per year. And this is where Andromeda Spaceways comes in. Since 2001, Andromeda's produced 45 issues now, which overtakes Orilis and makes Andromeda Australia's most prolific publisher of short speculative fiction. And Andromeda's run by a co-op, which makes it, I think, less susceptible to going belly up, because you've got this core group that remains fairly stable, but at the same time, each editor comes along to do a different issue, sort of like the guest stars you used to have on the Goodies.
Right.
So, one person can have a midlife crisis or, go off to live in Bognor or something. But the magazine itself is going to keep going. And with each different editor, you have different editorial preferences, of course. So each issue has a different feel to it. And, of course, sometimes you'll see a name on the cover that you wouldn't expect to see.
Well, that's exactly what's happened this time, really, isn't it?
Pretty much. I think since the table of contents was announced for 45, people have been saying to me, is that by any chance the Graeme Garden? And I think people are surprised.
When you're doing your edition, do you go out and seek stuff that you like to see in there, or do you have to work with a certain amount of things that are already slated for your issue?
No, each editor pretty much has discretion over what's going to appear. Andromeda has a really good slushing process, they call it, where people submit stories and they're read blind and they're given a ranking and they pass up the line until they enter what's called the slush pool, and editors often draw stories from that.
Right.
I chose my first story for the issue from the slush pool. It's by Deborah Kalin, one of Australia's best fantasy writers. But at the same time, if you feel like doing so, you can go out and ask people to write, and ultimately that's how Graeme's poem comes to appear. Let me take you back to the early 80s for a second.
Yeah.
Have you ever read Graeme's novel, The Seventh Man?
I've bought it, but I haven't got around to actually reading it yet.
You haven't got there yet. Well,
it's a political thriller, isn't it?
For those listeners who have not been familiar with it, it's a play on the Soviet defections of the 50s and 60s. So you're talking Philby, Burgess, McLean, the Cambridge Five, that sort of thing, and it works on a number of layers. I think it's a very layered prose, and it's a very good book. I think it's been overlooked a bit, but it really is a fantastic bit of writing. So if we go back to the 80s, I'm in primary school my parents are taking me to the public library every couple of weeks, and I see The Seventh Man on the shelf. I recognise Graeme's name because I've seen it in the credits of the goodies every week, and so I take the book home, I read it, and I really enjoy it. Although, as a 9-year-old, I'm probably only picking up the most superficial meanings from the work. But a couple of years ago, I found the book in a second-hand store. I bought it, I read it again, and I just started thinking, why hasn't Graeme written more than one novel?
Uh-huh.
And partly obviously he's extremely busy with all these projects, but part of me couldn't help thinking, I wonder if it could be because no one's written to him and just told him how good the book is. So I took it upon myself to do that, and I sent him a letter. I told him how much I'd enjoyed The Seventh Man, and I humbly asked him to write another book, which he hasn't done, of course, but I live in hope. The seed has been planted. But earlier this year, excuse me while I sort of get off track and try to bring myself back. I was putting the final touches on issue 45 of Andromeda, and I got an email from the layout guru, Simon Petrie, and he said to me, "There's a blank page we need to fill between the Tom Holt story and the contributor biographies. Do you have a poem you can use?" And my head immediately emptied. My brain escaped like Kenneth the Tortoise.
Oh no!
And I started thinking, who writes poetry that I like? And of course, the answer is no one, because I don't really like poetry at all. I don't understand it, and that's particularly the case for science fiction poetry, which is a very slippery beast. So I tweaked the question to be more like, who doesn't write poetry, but whose poetry, if they were to write it, might I like?
Oh, good thinking.
Well, I thought so. So I just happened to wander into the study at that moment, and I caught sight of The Seventh Man. The song of the Jolly Rock Lighthouse popped into my head, and I thought, of course, Graeme Garden. So I immediately fired up the computer and got out the tear-jerking music and the handfuls of fake snow and all the things you might expect. And I went begging by email, and Graeme was really good. He wrote back the next day, and he said that he was no poet. He said, which of course is false modesty, but
yeah.
But he said that he had been moved by my appeal, and so had penned a short poem. So to bring a long story to its conclusion, that's how issue 45 of Andromeda comes to feature the man who invented time travel.
Oh, so we've got you to thank for it.
Yeah, basically, I'll take the credit for that one.
Well, you should. You deserve the credit. Oh, that's great.
There was less than a 24-hour turnaround.
Right.
Which is quite incredible, and I'm very grateful to Graeme for doing that. He's obviously a very busy man, but I think one of these people who's so creative that he can turn his mind to such a thing and produce it very quickly.
Well, the issue itself just arrived in my inbox about 5 minutes before I rang you. So I've had an opportunity to read it now, and it is pretty good, and I'm going to obviously avoid the temptation to read it out. Because we want people to go along to Andromeda Spaceways Inflight Magazine and download it and buy it and check it out for themselves.
That's right. And I should caution people that Graeme's poem does comprise only about probably 1% of the publication. But at the same time, I think that the people who enjoy the goodies are the sort of people who are likely to enjoy the type of writing we see in Andromeda. It's pretty zany, a bit offbeat, and never dull.
Well, good-o. Do we want to read out an entire URL, or is there's something easy we can send people to?
The easiest place to get them is www.andromedaspaceways.com.
Right, and people can get hard copies, of course, if they want, because if you're a bit of a completist, you'd want a hard copy up on the shelf.
I think so. The hard copies look fantastic. They're in perfect bound format. They've got, without fail, they've got lovely covers, and I've got quite a few stacked up on my shelf, and they look pretty good.
Oh, cool. So Graeme's son, Tom, we know he's a concept artist, and he does a lot of fantasy work, and I actually saw him mentioned in the issue. You've put it in a little bit about Tom in Graeme's bio. And, has any of his art appeared in Andromeda Spaceways?
The short answer is no, but I should probably amend that to not yet. When I wrote to Graeme a couple of years ago, he did write back, of course, and he mentioned that Tom though living in Sweden, was working for a company based in Brisbane, which if I ever drive to the Gold Coast, I actually go straight past it. But this was before I joined Andromeda, so by the time I got around to editing an issue and thinking about artwork, the information had sort of slipped from my mind a bit. The art in my issues by Ina Bassman is a very talented local artist, but subsequently I've seen quite a bit of Tom's work, and I think it is very good. So, particularly now that there's a bit of a connection there, it wouldn't surprise me at all if editors of future issues were to contact Tom and ask him to contribute.
Yeah, that'd be good. It'd be very good.
Yeah.
So when did you begin watching the goodies? And what are your favourite episodes and memories from the show?
Well, we're talking the early 80s. I spent the first 4 years of primary school living out at Roma, which is, I'm not sure if you know, well, probably not many people know Roma. It's a small country town about 5 hours drive west of Brisbane. And I was allowed to watch half an hour of TV per day. And we only had the ABC, so I was into Doctor Who and Battle of the Planets, Monkey, things like that.
Classics.
And of course the goodies. So I actually came across something just the other day that I'd written back in grade 3, sort of an early 80s version of the Facebook profile. And it's written there in my shaky primary school handwriting. My favourite TV show is The Goodies.
Oh,
so, I've kept that going for many years. Favourite episodes? Ooh. Look, I studied ancient history at university, so romantics probably has a special place for me.
Cool.
U-Friend or UFO is very much in keeping with the speculative fiction tradition. But other than that, I probably gravitate towards the episodes that have a bit of an agenda to them. South Africa is one from the DVD, of course. Culture for the Masses, I very much like. I'm not sure if you remember that. Obviously, you probably do. Where Tim outbids the Americans for a flask with painting.
Yes, for trillion,
paying
quintillion dollars?
Trillion, quintillion, zillion pounds and 2.5 pence for it, of which the goodies have 2.5 pence.
Yeah.
I think Pollution is a fantastic episode. And that's certainly what I'd love to see on DVD. The thing about the goodies, I've always thought, unlike so many other shows, the humour is just so layered. They really lend themselves to rewatching. And over the years, I've probably reached the stage where I just love the little bits of nuance. If you think of the movies, you've got the goodies trying to recreate Macbeth, and you see Graeme there. He's got the script to Macbeth, and he's just tearing off page after page until there's only one left. And he hands it to Tim, and Tim says, "Promise me there's no killing." And Graeme goes, "Ah," and he rips off the top third of the page as if it's just the last little bit that he's missed. And of course, he immediately throws away the bottom 2/3.
Yeah.
And it's not just that he does this, but the way he does it. That I think it's so effective as a sort of comedic device. And if I had to pick one favourite moment from the goodies, it's probably from the episode Cecily. Not many people remember much about Cecily, I don't think, except for the bit that's in the opening credits, where Tim's dressed as a nanny and he's flying a kite and runs straight off the riverbank. But elsewhere in the episode, you've got Graeme. He's tinkering with a ride on a lawnmower, and he's adjusting all the knobs and buttons and so on. He eventually gets on, starts it up, and it rushes forward. He falls off the back of it and has to chase after it. And the footage it's all sped up a bit, as the goodies tended to do for scenes like that. But something about it looks odd. I don't know. Just made me laugh. Something about it. And this will tell you how sadly afflicted with goodies mania I've been over the years. I taped pretty much all the goodies episodes from TV back in the late 80s, early 90s. And I used to watch them quite a bit before my video player died. And I was watching Cecily one day, and this bit where Graeme chases after the lawnmower, I just wanted to know why it was making me laugh. And if you slow it down, you'll see that he doesn't just chase after it. He actually turns a full 360-degree circle before he sets off. And, it's these little touches, I think, that keep me coming back to watch each episode again. And, I just wonder sometimes if people are aware of how much thought went into the writing and performing of each episode. Because, they're all made so quickly, but I just think they're all fantastic productions.
Yeah, and as you say, if you go into that level of detail and appreciation, it's going to reward re-watching hundreds and hundreds of times.
That's right. I mean, some of the episodes I've watched, well, I probably don't like to say how many times, but there is quite literally always something that I see that I've missed on every other occasion I've watched the episode. There is always something there. And I think, other shows, they just end up seeming a little bit dull in comparison.
They just don't have as many elements bouncing around. You've got your highbrow humour and your lowbrow humour sort of all mixed together. Your slapstick and your conceptual stuff, and then there's just, as you say, little gems of performance that tend to fly by so quickly the first few viewings that you can really pick up on later on.
That's right. I mean, I know there was the BBC were never quite sure when to put out the goodies, whether it was a children's program or an adults program, and I think it's a testament to the show that I look back and I was watching it in probably grade 2, and it was my favourite TV show. Yet I can come back to this show quarter of a century later, and I can still say it's my favourite TV show. Whenever I watch it, I see something else, I appreciate something else, and it's just one of the all-time classics, isn't it?
Well, that's very, very true. And of course, the beauty of this whole thing is that we really do have to thank you for putting in the effort and getting the fruits of your labour that allow us Goodies fans to see a whole new side to Graeme. Aside from a few little pieces in the Goodies file and some of their other books, we haven't had any poetry from Graeme.
No, that's right. He casts himself as a reluctant poet. I know he wrote a book of children's poetry, The Skylighters, many years ago, which I haven't been able to track down yet. So he does have some sort of history. But the man who invented time travel, it's a wonderful little poem, and I think it rounds out the issue on just the right sort of mood, the right note. And very, very thankful to Graeme for taking the time to write it.
Thanks again for showing the initiative and contacting the great man and getting some poetry out of him.
Oh no, thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasure.